Hello there. For today's tasting, I'm taking a look at a Cote du Rhone. So this is Guigal's Cote du Rhone. It's the 2020 vintage of that. So Guigal are an important producer of Rhone wines. They're based in Ampuis. Their headquarters are on the west bank of the Rhône River, very close to Côte Rôtie. And the business is both a winery and a negociant. As a winery, they're one of the leading producers of both of Côte Rôtie and of Condrieu. My understanding is that certainly at one stage they produced something like 45% of all the Condrieu that was produced. Etienne Guigal started the company in 1946, so I'm not sure whether the E on the Guigal is Etienne Guigal, or whether it's the fact that the company used to be known as Établissement Guigal, but possibly that's in recognition of Etienne. For the 15 years prior to starting his own company, he'd been working for Vidal Fleury. In 1961, Marcel, Etienne's son, ended up having to leave school at the age of 17 to take over the family business, as his father had been suddenly rendered blind. It was a difficult time for winemaking in the Côte Rôtie region, and in honesty, Marcel played a massive role in the rejuvenation of Côte Rôtie as a region. There were plans at one stage to replace a lot of the vineyards there with housing. One of the main ways in which Marcel did this was to attract an enormous amount of attention to the region. He started producing wines much as they would be produced in Burgundy, single vineyard wines. And his trio of Côte Rôties, sometimes referred to as the LaLa wines, so La Mouline, Landonne and La Turque, have been so successful with critics that at one stage Guigal was the producer who held the most 100-point scores from Robert Parker's Wine Advocate. And today, Philippe, Marcel's son, is the winemaker here, the third generation of his family to be making Guigal wines. The family have always invested their profits in further vineyards, so they have significant holdings in Côte Rôtie, Condrieu, Hermitage, Crozes-Hermitage, Saint-Joseph and Gigondas. They've also purchased quite a number of businesses, the first in 1985 being Vidal Fleury. 10 years later in 1995 they bought the historic Château d'Ampuis. In 2001 they purchased the Jean-Louis Grippat and Valois estates. 2006 they bought Domaine Bonserine, and then most recently in 2017 in Châteauneuf-du-Pape they bought Château d'Anelli. They've also established their own cooperage. On the same site that Etienne Guigal set out making wine, they now have 3 hectares of cellars, and their own estates cover 45 hectares, about half of which is in the prestigious Côte Rôtie appellation. Having said all that, the Cote du Rhone is a negociant wine. If you look at the back label, it doesn't mention production, it simply says that the wine's been élève et mis en bouteille par E. Guigal. Possibly as a result of that, there's not a huge amount of detail about the winemaking, and I should imagine that if you have different people producing these wines and selling them to Guigal, the winemaking will vary to an extent. Certainly they say the soil types are diverse, so there's sedimentary soils, limestone, they say pebbles. I wonder whether that's gravel or whether that's more gallet-like, soils with granite and alluvial soils. What we're told about the winemaking is that it's traditional. The fruit is destemmed, it's crushed, it undergoes a temperature-controlled fermentation, and that maceration continues after fermentation is finished. The wine ages for 1.5 years in oak barrels. Certainly it's French oak. I've seen a suggestion there may be some American oak used as well, and they're using larger barrels, puncheons. When it comes to blending, the final blend of this wine in this vintage was 50% of Syrah with 40% of Grenache and then 10% of Mourvèdre. So you'd expect from the Syrah and the Mourvèdre in this that this should be quite a structured wine, but with a sort of a rounded, soft mid-palate from the Grenache. Given the size of the oak, I'm not given any indication that there's a particularly large percentage is new. I would expect that the influence of the oak is more to soften and to allow controlled oxidation than to impart oak flavours into the wine. I've also seen an indication that Guigal aged the wine for 3 years, so that would suggest that it then stays in bottle in their cellars for somewhere in the region of 18 months prior to release. So let's see what we make of the wine, shall we? It's a reasonably dark ruby red. It's at best medium to deep. I can quite clearly see the stem of the glass through the wine there. Now, the label tells me that this wine has 15% alcohol, so I'm not surprised to see it's forming some quite heavy tears on the glass, and that the tears are moving quite slowly down the edges of the glass there. See what we make of the aroma, shall we? The aromas are a rich, ripe combination of almost sort of plummy red fruit and some rich, ripe raisin notes. And sitting in between the two of those, there's quite a powerful sort of spiciness, a pepperiness, maybe a little bit of cinnamon. So maybe the cinnamon's denoting a touch of new oak, I'm not sure, but I think it's probably more likely to be coming from the Syrah fruit. So let's taste. The wine is mouth-filling, it's rich, it's juicy. There's quite a smooth texture. Given that it's 15% alcohol, actually, there's good ripe fruit that's stopping the alcohol from immediately giving a warmth. It's just starting to cut in on the back of my tongue where there's a heat, a little bit of an alcohol burn there. There are notes of spice, and at the same time there's a little bit of tannic grip. This is quite a velvety, smooth sort of texture in the mouth there. There's that richness, and there's a sort of a red to black fruit. There's a red plum through to dark plum, but ripe red plum, cooked red plum. And behind it, these spices. I don't think they're particularly oak spices. There are peppery notes, perhaps a touch of cinnamon. There isn't a particularly obvious acidity to the wine, but the fruit's retaining its freshness reasonably well, and it's only when you get to the end of the palate that the alcohol is taking over slightly from the juicy fruit, leaving it a little bit drying, a little bit spicy, and perhaps foreshortening the finish just a little. In general, I'd suggest that for Côte du Rhône, this is quite structured, it's quite full-bodied, there's a generosity, a ripeness, a richness and a roundness. Many Côte du Rhônes are sort of soft and have more bright red fruit. This is a wine that I think would happily age for 4 or 5 years. I don't think you need particularly to age it. I think it's perfectly accessible to drink now. Looking at the aggregated score that we give this on the Wine Searcher website, it gets an 89. I think that's a pretty fair score. I don't think I'd go particularly higher than that because the alcohol is quite obvious on the finish. 15% is really quite powerful, and I think that's quite powerful actually for this particular wine. In other vintages it's more likely to be 14 and a half. But this is not a hugely expensive wine, and I don't think you can complain. I think you're getting great value for money for this, for its richness and its power, and I think you'd find that it's a versatile wine whose spiciness would partner quite a lot of rich, full, flavoursome dishes very well. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have enjoyed watching, do please press the like button. If you have any views you'd like to express, do please pop those in the comments box below. If you have any films you think would like to watch, do please feel free to share it with them. We greatly appreciate that support from you. I will leave a link in the notes below so that you can follow that to the Wine Searcher website for our page for this vintage of this wine, and you can see pricing, you can see availability, you can see the critic scores as I mentioned, and any other detail we've got about the wine. So thank you once again for joining us, and I do hope you'll manage to try and take some time and come and join us for another tasting in the near future. Thanks again. Bye for now.